I felt the perspective on exploring and refining observation made a lot of sense. I was interested in, is it possible to spend too much time observing and reading other people's research, looking for connection? Our topic is botany, but we are reading paper in air conditioning research because that's what interests us. There are two parts of the question. The first part, can you spend too much time? I would say there are two scenarios. So for example, at MIT, in our department, there are students like you typically do a PhD 5 years. Some student will come into the MIT, start to work on some project, go deep into a project, writing a paper. While writing, they explore other ideas. Right? Some people do this. No, I'm in the thinking mode. I'll keep exploring. By year 3, you're still exploring this. That's clearly spending too much time exploring this. You cannot make a good judgment on whether the research topic is good until you put some serious effort into it. Then you can actually judge this is good or relevant or not. So definitely take some time to observe a few things, read some papers, but don't just keep doing that forever here. So that's one side. For us, again, I labeled the hours in it. So therefore, you just follow that. After these few hours, you should move on, go to the next step. Yeah. Then you can do the second round, the whole thing again. That's totally fine. So that's one aspect. But the second aspect, in terms of your lifelong habit, you should keep observing and reading throughout your life. There's no end of it. There's a lifestyle choice. It's just for most people, they choose to be numb when they see something. But for you guys, you choose to be interested in something. And this is way beyond doing a particular research. You keep this habit across the entire lifespan. Cool. Yeah. Others, questions, thoughts? Yes. Oh, Eco, when I get an idea from connection between my observation and articles, sometimes I feel like research this connection is something out of my ability. Oh, yeah, that's a very good question there. For that, I have two thoughts on this. One, if you find a question that's worthy the research effort, even though yourself cannot tackle it, the fact you have identified this question is a very important contribution. Of course, the prerequisite is this is a worthy question. Then if you find that, you should share that with a professor or some researcher in this related field. Let him know, say, I found this question there. I think it's very important. I cannot do it myself. Can you guide me on this? So if this is a worthy question, hopefully that will generate the interest from the professor or the researcher saying, wow, thank you for letting me know. I like this question. So let me put some resource into that. I may work with you on this or may have a PhD student working with you on this and guide you through it. So that's one. Second point, this motivation of doing something is much more important than the capability of doing something. In many scenarios, once you are motivated, you genuinely care about something, you will put so much effort to learn the technique to enable you to do. Right? This is entirely different. That's why the research versus just learning, like taking your high school class is very different. When you're taking, say, a biology class, most of the kind of, oh, the teacher teach me this, give me the homework, therefore I have to do it, right? I do whatever I can, I don't want. But when you are so interested with the topic, with a kind of a research question, you may spend hours and hours, hundreds of hours on it without even knowing about it. Yeah. That's actually the best way to trigger learning. Right? So after these 100 hours, you may find, oh, that's a graduate within reach of my capability now. Okay, yeah, thanks. The next one, Serena, I think it was helpful to get through your steps. I especially like the part of your analogy of a spiral for coming up with the topic in step 3. That's good. I'm glad that's helpful. A question I have is, how can we choose which research topic to tackle? You talk about how it's important that it has a large impact on others. Also, it seems like for a lot of research questions, I think there are already studies and papers published. Good. Yeah, thank you. So for that, there are two ways to think about it. The first way, remember the CRISP criteria: clear, relevant, innovative, specific, practical. You can literally use that criteria to check it against each of the questions you have, right? And judge, on this. After you look through that, you probably find a good variation between those topics. Yes. So for example, if you say, oh, many of the questions, there are already studies paper published, then you find that, oh, if that's the case, what this means is it failed the criteria of being innovative. It's no longer new because people studied it. But let me add a caveat to that. You often find, even though some people already studied that particular, if you offer a variation to the question, most likely you'll still find something new. That's one way to look. Of course, you want to look at, is that variation significant enough? If it's a too small a variation, that probably there's not enough differentiation from existing research, then probably not a good idea. So that's one type. So that's one. The second one is, again, back to the who question. You have 5 questions to ask, and then you start to interview people. If you find for question number 4, so many people care about it. So many people feel puzzled about it. They almost saying, Serena, please work on this topic so that I can use it. This is a very good sign. That's a good topic to work on. For a topic that doesn't often directly manifest in people environment that surrounds me, I am interested in new energy. How do you recommend connecting that to observation that I could find in the real world? That's an interesting question there. 2 thoughts. One is that energy, I would say, is actually not too far away from your life. Yeah, even though we may not pay attention to it, but if you think about it, anything you do in your household, there's some people provided energy, largely electricity, could be gas, could be oil. And if you have, say, electric vehicle, you're probably using battery. Or if you use an iPhone, there's a battery in it. If you, say, take a flight across the Atlantic Ocean, some fuel have to power the plane. So energy, I would say, is pretty close to our life there. You can mostly touch it. Even things like, let's say, wind power. Let me give you an example. The wind power, say, outside Cape Cod in the ocean, they put a wind tower. One complaint from the neighborhood saying, oh, that changed my landscape or changed my view, so I don't like it. So that's another thing that touches people's life. So that's one thought. The second thought is, even you say, oh, I really cannot find direct connection to it, but I find enough evidence from the literature, from this frontier of knowledge saying, oh, all these papers point out that there's a gap. So for example, in this new hydrogen fuel design, saying hydrogen as a fuel, that you can build a fuel cell to use hydrogen to generate electricity, to find a good use. But there's a common understanding that it's so hard to store and transport hydrogen. This is a commonly recognized problem. And then say, if you have a methodology or way to tackle that, even though that's not directly in your life, but that's still worthy of the study. So that's another way to judge that. David, there was a very informative class. I was wondering if there's a strategy for what to do with a very interesting but a very complex problem like poverty and economic development. Good point. For that, 2 thoughts. One is narrowly define your problem. Say, for example, oh, I want to tackle the poverty problem in developing countries. That's too broad a question here. As I said, there are probably 100,000 people working in this field. You may say, okay, let me narrow that. How do I narrow? You may say, I want to study poverty problem in the specific country or region. Let's say certain villages in southern India. So that's one qualifier. The second one, you say, oh, I'm interested in the poverty problem likely due to the lack of education. So now you're not just looking at poverty in general, you're looking at the relationship between lack of education and poverty. The third one, you say, oh, in this area, I noticed that there's a strong gender differences. In certain culture, girls are not allowed the opportunity to go to school. So I look at the specific female education and the lack of it and its impact on poverty. What I just said, we are adding 4 or 5 layers of qualification. Now the question becomes much more narrow. In this case, you'll find it's more likely to be a question that has not been studied specifically. That's where you can contribute. Even though the broader theme is complex and a lot of issues there, but you identify a much more narrowly defined question where you can contribute this. Of course, there may, what I just said, some people may literally have studied it, female education-related poverty problem in the village in India. That may be a case. That's what, do a literature review. Search that in a Google Scholar. Oh, it happened to be, wow, somebody studied it. That's great. Yeah. So if you get to that level of specificity and somebody studied it, I would say you should really celebrate it. Because as a high school student, you identified a question independently that some like high-level professors spend 5 years working on. That itself is amazing on this. So even though that particular problem you may have to change or modify, but you demonstrate your capability to develop this question. Good. So next one, Catherine, I really love your talk tonight. Do you have any tips for reading heavy research article from for some without much experience? Yeah, good. That's also a common question. Several layers. One layer is, remember I mentioned there's a Nature Science, PNAS, but also there are economists and the New York Times. Depending on your initial familiarity with this, you may start by reading Economist and the New York Times because they are popular magazines. They are written in a way that like reasonably educated people can understand, rather than in this very jargon-heavy, specific technical way of writing it in Nature and Science. So start with these journals. From the purpose of generating new idea, reading Economist and New York Times are just as good. Because at this stage, you're not worried about the technicality there. Actually, the common language makes you much more likely to connect with. So that's level one. But if you say, no, I passed that stage, I understand exactly what I want to do, I narrow this question, I just want to go deep into this. That's where you have to start to read these hardcore scientific journals. For that part, let me give you two suggestions. Read title, abstract, introduction, and the conclusion first. Title, abstract, introduction, conclusions. Read that first. Read it twice, read 3 times until you really get it. Then you go down to, oh, here's the data, here's the methodology, here's the appendix, here's a specific proof of this problem, here's the experimental protocols, I don't really understand what it is. Go in that tiers. The reason is title, abstract, introduction, conclusion should give you the ballpark of the value of this article without you go into the technical notions of the equations, the theories, etc. So that's the first one. After you read those things, really understand, again, you may read it 3 times, 4 times before you really get it. Right? Then start to tackle the technical part. For that, do not force yourself to understand everything said in the paper. If certain things you don't know, for example, if something really requires you to understand this very advanced game theory that typically takes 5 years to train a PhD to understand, then you're a high school student. Don't force yourself to do that. It doesn't make sense. Yes. So you should tackle the part that with a certain effort you can capture. And even you only capture part of that, that's very good. Then you say, oh, now I get, in order to do this research, I really need this knowledge. Then I go actually read my mathematical books. I need to take an online class to understand physics. I need to do the basic machine learning textbook. So that's where you identify specific knowledge gap. For that, there's no shortcut. So if you don't understand what deep learning is, then you have to read a book on deep learning and do it, right? So if you never understand how the nervous system works, then you have to read what nervous system is and understand it. But in terms of reading articles, reading the part on the introduction and conclusion first, then go tackle, that's a good way to do that. Then lastly, I would say, that's a very good place to use ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok. Remember in last class I mentioned I have a lot of caution on using it, but in this context, this is a perfect use case. You read the whole article, then there's one particular sentence quote, oh, this is a Jacobian matrix I need to do. That I never heard what is Jacobian matrix. I never. Then just copy that part into ChatGPT saying, I'm reading this article, I don't understand this term, explain to me. And also you can say, explain to a 70-year-old high school student this. Or say this is a diagram, illustrate this molecule structure, I don't understand it. Copy the diagram into ChatGPT and ask you. So this is where the technology is so powerful. Until 3 years ago, most people do not have access to this. And when you read these high-level articles, in the whole world, there may be only 50 people can answer you this question. And most likely, as a high school student, you don't have access to these 50 people. But today you do. And you can use ChatGPT to answer the questions. Okay.